When a human child brings her pet to an elite Galactic Academy, the faculty learns a terrifying truth that adorable furball is actually a juvenile apex predator from Earth. Professor Lyra attempts to remove the creature for everyone's safety, but the human girl's protective snarl freezes an entire classroom of alien students. What follows is a darkly comedic lesson in why humans and their bonded predators are the most dangerous partnership in the galaxy, as witnessed through the eyes of a very nervous academic who just wanted to teach introductory stellar navigation. Professor Lyra had been teaching introductory stellar navigation for 12 cycles now, and she prided herself on maintaining a calm, orderly classroom. Her 4 eyes could track every student simultaneously, a genetic advantage of her Valkyrian heritage that made cheating virtually impossible. Her scales shimmered a pleasant shade of academic blue as she arranged her data tablets across the lectern, preparing for another term of eager young minds ready to learn the basics of not crashing into celestial bodies. The Galactic Academy's morning light filtered through the reinforced windows, casting geometric patterns across rows of specialized seating. She had 23 students enrolled this term, a mixed bag of species from across 7 sectors. 3 Zephyrians clustered near the ventilation ports, their methane breathers humming softly. A pair of Corvaxian twins occupied the back row, their rocky exteriors already scarred with the elaborate patterns of scholarly achievement. One extremely nervous Flitwick perched on a modified stool, his antenna twitching as he reviewed his tablets. Standard first day, routine, predictable, exactly how Lyra preferred it. Then Cassidy walked in. The human girl couldn't have been more than 15 cycles old, though Lyra always struggled with human age assessment. They all looked disturbingly soft and fragile to her, like they might tear if you handled them too roughly. This one had that typical human coloring, brownish head fur pulled back in what they called a ponytail, those unsettling forward-facing predator eyes scanning the room, and clothing that seemed entirely inadequate for temperature regulation. But it wasn't the human that made Lyra's secondary eyelids snap shut in confusion. It was the creature tucked under the girl's arm. Small, furry, impossibly fluffy, with ridiculous pointed ears that seemed too large for its skull. The thing had enormous eyes, round and dark, giving it an expression of permanent surprise. Its tiny pink nose twitched as it surveyed the classroom, and a long, fluffy tail curved around Cassidy's elbow like some sort of organic scarf. Lyra's scales rippled through several shades of confusion, blue to purple to a questioning shade of green. What in the 7 systems was that thing? And more importantly, why had this human child brought it to her classroom? The creature blinked at Lyra with those absurdly large eyes, and she felt her threat assessment systems fail completely. It looked like something designed by a committee whose only directive was make it adorable. Soft fur in shades of orange and cream covered its compact body, with distinctive stripes that seemed more decorative than functional. Its ears swiveled independently, tracking sounds around the room with disturbing precision, but they were so ridiculously oversized that the effect was more comical than menacing. When Cassidy took her seat in the 3rd row, the thing settled onto her lap with a sound that Lyra's translator rendered as purring, actually purring, like a tiny furry engine of contentment. The classroom's reaction was immediate and divided. One of the Zephyrians leaned forward, his breathing apparatus fogging slightly with excitement. "Is that a Terran mammal? I have read about these. They are considered companionable, yes." The Corvaxian twins, however, had gone completely still, which for their species indicated either deep meditation or abject terror. Lyra suspected the latter. The nervous Flitwick student, whose name badge read Apprentice Kixon, stood up so fast his stool clattered backward. His antenna shot straight up, a clear distress signal among his people. "That is a predator." His voice hit frequencies that made Lyra's scales itch. "That is an Earth predator, apex classification. Why is there an apex predator in our learning space?" Cassidy looked up with that expression humans got when they found something amusing. The corners of her mouth turned upward, revealing flat teeth that somehow seemed more threatening than fangs. "Relax, dude. This is just Ranger. He's a cat, totally harmless." Harmless. The human had just used the word harmless to describe what Kixon was now backing away from with all 6 of his limbs trembling. Lyra's scales flushed to an authoritative shade of deep purple. "Miss Cassidy, I am going to need you to clarify what exactly you have brought into my classroom." The human scratched behind the creature's ears, and it responded by closing its eyes and pushing its head into her hand. The purring intensified. "This is Ranger. He's my emotional support animal. I have all the paperwork filed with student services. You should have received a notification about accommodations for human students with bonded companions." Emotional support. From a predator. Lyra's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as she processed this information. She vaguely recalled a notification about human cultural requirements, but she had assumed it meant dietary restrictions or temperature preferences, not live predators in the classroom. "The guidelines clearly state that dangerous fauna are prohibited from academic spaces," Lyra said, her voice taking on that carefully measured tone she used when explaining why cheating would result in expulsion. Ranger chose that moment to yawn, revealing a pink mouth, a tiny pink tongue, and a set of teeth that made Kixon emit a high-pitched whistle of pure fear. Sharp teeth, multiple sharp teeth, designed for tearing flesh. Then the creature stretched, extending its front legs to show retractable claws that gleamed in the morning light. "Oh yeah," Cassidy said, still smiling that unsettling human smile. "He does that when he's comfortable. Cute, right?" Lyra's scales had turned a shade of purple she didn't even know she possessed. Lyra straightened to her full height, which was impressive for a Valkyrian, and cleared her throat with a sound like gravel shifting in a container. "Miss Cassidy, while I appreciate that you have filed appropriate documentation, I must insist that your companion animal be removed from this learning environment. Galactic Academy regulations are quite clear on the matter of predatory species in shared spaces. It creates an atmosphere of tension that is not conducive to academic focus." She gestured with 2 of her 4 arms toward the door, keeping her other 2 crossed in a posture of absolute authority. This was her classroom. She had handled difficult students before. One small human and her questionable pet would not disrupt her carefully structured curriculum. Cassidy's expression shifted, and Lyra recognized the look from her studies of human behavior. It was the face they made right before they became inconveniently stubborn. "With all respect, Professor, the documentation I filed isn't a request. It is a notification of protected accommodations under the Human Integration Accords, Section 7, Subsection 12. Ranger stays with me. Non-negotiable." The girl's tone remained polite, even friendly, but there was something underneath it that made Lyra's scales prickle with unease. Ranger, apparently bored with the conversation, began grooming himself, licking one paw and dragging it over his ear in a gesture that would have been endearing if not for those retractable murder claws, flexing with each movement. The sunlight caught his fur just right, making him look like some sort of tactical weapon wrapped in a deceptively soft package. "I must protest," Kixon squeaked from his position near the emergency exit. "My people have ancestral fear responses to feline predators. This is creating a hostile academic environment for me." One of the Zephyrians raised a tentacle. "I find the creature fascinating, actually. Does it require specific atmospheric conditions? What is its primary prey in natural habitats?" "Prey?" Another student, a Thalaxian with bioluminescent patterns across her skin, dimmed to a sickly green color. "And it has prey?" "Active prey." Cassidy sighed, continuing to pet Ranger with long, even strokes. "He eats kibble from a bag, sometimes wet food if he's been extra good. The only thing he hunts is the little robotic mouse I got him for enrichment." As if to demonstrate his complete harmlessness, Ranger rolled onto his back in Cassidy's lap, exposing his soft belly and tucking his paws against his chest. His tail swished lazily. He looked up at Lyra with those enormous eyes, and made a small chirping sound that her translator unhelpfully labeled as friendly greeting. Lyra felt her authority crumbling like a poorly constructed asteroid mining operation. "The visual presentation of harmlessness does not negate biological classification," she said, hearing the desperation creeping into her own voice. "That creature is designed to kill. Look at its forward-facing eyes. Binocular vision for tracking prey. Those teeth are not for processing vegetation. The retractable claws serve only one evolutionary purpose." "Counter-argument," Cassidy said, holding up one finger while Ranger grabbed at it playfully with his soft paws, claws carefully sheathed. "He is also designed to be cute. That is also evolution. Cats domesticated themselves because humans found them adorable and useful. It is a symbiotic relationship. The Corvaxian twins whispered to each other in their grinding stone language, and Lyra's translator picked up fragments, human pack bonding protocols and emotional entanglement with predators, and this explains so much about their military tactics. Lyra's scales cycled through colors rapidly now, settling on a frustrated shade of orange. This was getting out of hand. The human was technically correct about the documentation, but having an apex predator in her classroom violated every instinct Lyra possessed. She made a decision she would very soon regret. "Miss Cassidy, I am going to have to contact administration about this matter. In the meantime, I must insist, for the safety and comfort of all students, that you temporarily remove your companion from this space." Lyra reached toward her communication console. Cassidy's expression changed again, and this time there was nothing polite about it. Lyra made the mistake of not waiting for administration to respond. Perhaps it was her 12 cycles of teaching experience making her overconfident. Perhaps it was the way Ranger looked so utterly non-threatening, now playfully batting at a strand of Cassidy's hair. Perhaps it was simply that she had never actually dealt with a human before, not really, and all her theoretical knowledge meant absolutely nothing in practical application. She stepped down from her lectern and walked toward Cassidy's desk, two arms extended in what she intended as a calm, authoritative gesture. "I will take the creature to the administrative holding area while we sort this out. I am sure this is simply a misunderstanding about proper procedures." Her hands were perhaps 3 inches from Ranger when everything went sideways. The sound that came from Cassidy's throat should not have been possible from such a small, soft-looking species. It was not loud. That was the thing that made it so much worse. It was low, quiet, and so thick with threat that Lyra's genetic memory, going back thousands of generations, screamed at her to stop moving immediately. The snarl started as a rumble, and rose to something that bypassed all rational thought and spoke directly to the part of Lyra's brain that understood predator and prey and which one she was. Cassidy had not stood up. She had not raised her voice. She had simply pulled Ranger closer to her chest and made that sound, and her face had transformed into something that Lyra would see in her nightmares for cycles to come. Those flat human teeth were bared. Those forward-facing eyes had gone cold and hard. The girl's shoulders had tensed in a way that suggested coiled violence, ready to spring. "Touch him," Cassidy said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and you will regret it." The classroom erupted in panic responses. Kixon fainted, crumpling to the floor in a heap of twitching antennae. The Zephyrian's breathing apparatus began cycling so fast they created a whistling sound like alarms. One of the Corvaxian twins actually cracked, a stress fracture appearing down the center of his rocky torso. The Thalaxian student's bioluminescence went completely dark, her species equivalent of playing dead. 3 students bolted for the door simultaneously. Lyra's scales had gone pure white, a color she had only achieved once before, when her spacecraft had nearly collided with a debris field. Aim. Every one of her 4 eyes was locked on Cassidy, and her body had frozen in a position of submission that bypassed conscious thought entirely. But worse than the human's reaction was Ranger's. The creature had gone absolutely still in Cassidy's arms. The purring had stopped. Those ridiculous ears were flattened against his skull, transforming his silhouette from cute to aerodynamic and predatory. His eyes, which had seemed so large and innocent moments before, had narrowed to slits that caught the light like polished blades. His tail had puffed to twice its normal size, and every hair on his body stood on end, making him look larger, more dangerous. Then he hissed. It was not a loud sound. None of the threatening sounds these two were making were loud. That was the horror of it. Ranger's mouth opened to reveal all of those sharp teeth at once, and the hiss that emerged was the auditory equivalent of a knife being slowly drawn across metal. It was a promise. It was a warning. It was the sound that small prey animals heard right before they stopped being alive. Lyra's translator, usually so reliable, simply displayed detected. Recommend retreat. Thank you, translator. Very helpful. The professor found herself taking 3 steps backward without consciously deciding to move. Her 4 arms had crossed over her chest in a protective gesture. Her scales were cycling through colors so fast she was probably giving off a strobe effect. Cassidy had not moved from her seat. Ranger had not left her lap. But the entire dynamic of the classroom had shifted fundamentally. There was a predator in this room, certainly. Actually, there were two predators in this room, and Lyra had just made the catastrophic error of threatening what they considered theirs. "I think," Cassidy said, her voice returning to something almost normal, though her eyes remained cold, "we should wait for administration after all. I am happy to explain the documentation to whoever needs to hear it. But, nobody touches my cat. Are we clear, Professor?" Lyra's vocal organs had apparently forgotten how to function. She managed a jerky nod. The standoff held for what felt like several geological ages but was probably only 30 seconds. Then the classroom door opened, and Security Officer Zayden walked in, which somehow made everything infinitely worse. "An prejudice imbattestressaben. Such an isn't Kevin." Security Officer Zayden was a Krellian, which meant he stood nearly 7 feet tall, had natural armor plating across his shoulders and chest, and possessed the kind of physical presence that usually ended conflicts before they began. He ducked through the doorway, followed by 2 additional security personnel carrying what appeared to be containment equipment, a reinforced crate, several sets of heavy gloves, and something that looked disturbingly like a net launcher. Lyra had never been so relieved and so horrified at the same time. "Professor Lyra," Zayden's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "We received an automated alert about elevated stress levels in this classroom. Multiple panic responses detected." His eyes scanned the room, taking in the unconscious Flitwick, the cracked Korvaxian, the students pressed against the far walls. Then his gaze landed on Cassidy and Ranger. "I see. We have a containment situation." "No," Cassidy said flatly. "We do not have a containment situation. We have a discrimination situation." Zayden's armor plate shifted. His version of a confused expression. "Young human, I can see you have brought an unauthorized predator to campus. I am going to need you to surrender the creature for temporary holding while we sort out the proper channels." He took 1 step forward. Ranger's ears went flat again. Cassidy's hand moved to rest on Ranger's back, and her expression suggested that diplomacy was hanging by a very thin thread. "Officer Zayden, I strongly recommend you review Human Integration Accords, Section 7, Subsection 12, before you take another step. What you are about to do is not just against regulations, it is against treaty law." Zayden paused. To his credit, he was smarter than Lyra had been. "Explain, quickly." Cassidy took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice had shifted into something rehearsed, like she had been through this conversation before. "Humans form what we call companion bonds with certain species. These bonds are not casual. They are not simply ownership of an animal. They are deep psychological connections that affect our neurochemistry, our emotional regulation, and our overall mental health. Ranger is not my pet. He is my registered emotional support companion. We have been together since I was 7 years old. Separating us causes measurable psychological harm to both of us." "It is a predator," Zayden said, though his tone had lost some of its certainty. "He is a domesticated predator," Cassidy corrected. "Cats have lived alongside humans for over 10,000 years. They are as much a part of human culture as our music or our literature or our absolutely baffling attachment to dangerous hobbies." As if sensing he needed to prove his domestication credentials, Ranger chose that moment to start purring again and slowly blink at Zayden. Lyra had read somewhere that slow blinking was a cat's way of showing trust and affection. It looked absolutely terrifying on a creature with retractable claws and hunting instincts. "The creature appears aggressive," one of Zayden's team members offered, a silicate female, whose translucent body was currently showing stress fractures. "He appears protective," Cassidy countered. "There is a difference. You walked in here with containment equipment and hostile intent." He responded appropriately to a threat. "If you come in peace, he is the sweetest, most gentle animal you will ever meet." Ranger punctuated this statement by yawning again, showing all his teeth, then immediately starting to groom his paw with his tongue. Lick, 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 drag across face. Utterly adorable. Completely horrifying. The classroom door opened again, and 3 more humans walked in. 2 females and 1 male, all wearing academy uniforms, all moving with that distinctive human walk that somehow suggested both casualness and readiness for violence. "We heard there was a situation with Cassidy and Ranger," the tallest girl said, her arms crossed. She had bright blue hair, which Lyra understood was a fashion choice rather than a genetic marker. "Figured we should provide some context before this gets out of hand." "Too late for that," Lyra muttered, her scales still cycling through distressed colors. The male human, who had several metal rings through his facial features in what Lyra could only assume was decorative body modification, leaned against a desk with infuriating casualness. "Let me guess. Someone tried to take the cat." Cassidy went full mama bear. Everyone panicked. Classic first day with a human scenario. "Mama bear?" Lyra's translator struggled with the idiom. "It means she activated protective instincts," the third human explained, a shorter girl with dark skin and carefully styled hair. "Humans are pack bonding specialists, Officer Zayden. We form emotional attachments to anything that stays near us long enough. Plants, robots. Definitely predators who figured out that being cute and useful was an excellent survival strategy. Our treaties specifically protect these relationships because the last time a station tried to confiscate someone's emotional support animal, well, she trailed off meaningfully." Zayden's plates shifted again. What happened? The human in question was a retired military officer. She had a dog, which is another Earth predator, larger than a cat. They tried to take it during a station inspection. The blue-haired girl smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. She negotiated its return, forcefully. 17 security personnel ended up in medical. The dog was fine. The human was also fine. The station's reputation was not fine. Zayden looked at Cassidy with new appreciation. "And you would—" "I am 15 years old," Cassidy said calmly. "But I have been training in 3 forms of martial arts since I was 6, and I love my cat more than I value my academic career. So yes, officer, I would. But I really hope I do not have to, because I actually want to be here. I just want to be here with Ranger, as is my legal right." The standoff had evolved from physical to bureaucratic, which somehow felt even more dangerous. The communication console on Lyra's desk chimed, and a holographic projection materialized above it. Captain Sable, the Academy's Director of Student Affairs, appeared with the long-suffering expression of someone who had dealt with this exact situation multiple times before. She was Terosian, with elegant silver skin and 3 graceful arms that she used to gesture with excessive patience. "Good morning, everyone," Captain Sable said, her tone suggesting it was anything but good. "Officer Zayden, please stand down. Professor Lyra, please stop panicking. Humans, please stop looking so smug about being technically correct, which I understand is your favorite kind of correct." The blue-haired human grinned. Captain Sable's projection expanded to display a document dense with legal text. "What we have here is a failure of intercultural education, which frankly is embarrassing for an institution of our caliber. Professor Lyra, when you received your class roster, you should have also received mandatory reading materials about accommodating human students. Did you complete those materials?" Lyra's scales flushed with embarrassment, shifting to a mottled pattern of purple and gray. "I skimmed them. They were quite lengthy, and I had curriculum planning to finalize." "They were lengthy because humans are complicated," Captain Sable said, not unkindly. "Let me provide the abbreviated version. Humans evolved as persistence hunters on a death world called Earth. Everything on Earth is trying to kill everything else on Earth. So humans developed an unusual survival strategy. They befriended the things that could kill them. They call it pack bonding, and it is both their greatest strength and most bewildering characteristic." She gestured, and the hologram shifted to show images of various Earth animals. Humans have domesticated hundreds of species. Wolves became dogs. Wild cats became house cats. They have bonded with horses, birds, reptiles, and in some documented cases, apex predators that could easily tear them apart. They do not see these creatures as threats. They see them as family. Ranger meowed softly, and Cassidy scratched under his chin without looking, an automatic gesture of affection. The bond between a human and their companion animal is neurologically measurable. Captain Sable continued. "When they interact, both species release hormones that reduce stress and increase feelings of safety and happiness. For humans with anxiety, trauma, or other psychological needs, these bonds are not luxuries, they are medical necessities. Which is why, under the Human Integration Accords, forcibly separating a bonded pair is classified as psychological assault. Zayden's armor plates clicked together nervously. The incident with the military officer and the dog was one of 17 similar incidents across 4 sectors before we established proper protocols, Captain Sable confirmed. Humans do not respond well to threats against their bonded companions. They respond very, very poorly. The officer in question was actually showing restraint because station personnel were just doing their jobs. She could have been much more destructive. Lyra felt her worldview crumbling like a comet entering atmosphere. But it is a predator. Multiple students are experiencing fear responses, which is a valid concern for accommodations and classroom management. Captain Sable agreed. But the solution is not removal of the protected companion. Solution is education and gradual exposure. Most species acclimate to the presence of Earth animals within 3 to 5 sessions once they understand the animals are not hunting them. Cats, specifically, are exceptionally low risk. They are small. Their prey drive is satisfied by toys and kibble, and they are naturally inclined toward lazy behavior. As if on cue, Ranger flopped over in Cassidy's lap, sprawling on his back with his paws in the air, purring so loudly that Lyra's desk began to vibrate slightly. The male human with the facial piercings snorted. "Yeah, look at that apex predator. Truly terrifying. Absolutely ready to strike at any moment." Lyra stared at the creature, now making biscuits in the air with his paws, claws extending and retracting rhythmically. It was adorable. It was also a behavior pattern designed to tear apart prey. How did humans live like this? How did they look at something with murder mittens and razor teeth and just decide it was friend-shaped? Humans, she said slowly, are insane. Aggressively friendly is the term we prefer, the blue-haired girl offered cheerfully. But yes, from your perspective, probably insane. We tend to adopt anything that holds still long enough. Ranger is actually on the very tame end of human companion choices. Some humans have snakes, or spiders, or birds that can break fingers with their beaks. One human in Sector 4, Captain Sable added with a weary tone, has a registered emotional support alligator. What is an alligator? Lyra asked, though she was not sure she wanted to know. Armored ambush predator with a bite force that can crush bones, Cassidy supplied helpfully. But they are also surprisingly chill if you raise them right, and they like to be scratched under the chin. The human brain sees that and goes, yes, good, friend-shaped. Let us cuddle this dinosaur. Lyra's scales had gone completely white again. Your species is a menace. Yes, all 4 humans said simultaneously, with obvious pride. Captain Sable's hologram flickered out, after extracting a promise from Lyra to complete the intercultural training modules by end of week. Officer Zayden and his team retreated with their containment equipment, looking simultaneously relieved and disappointed. The other human students dispersed to their own classes after confirming that Cassidy and Ranger were staying put, which left Lyra with a classroom full of traumatized students, one incredibly calm human girl, and a cat who had decided that grooming his hindquarters was now the most important task in the galaxy. Right, Lyra said, her voice cracking slightly. She cleared her throat and tried again. Let us proceed with today's lesson. Introductory Stellar Navigation. Chapter 1. Basic Coordinate Systems and Why They Matter When You Do Not Want to Fly into a Star. Kixon had regained consciousness, and was now perched on his stool as far from Cassidy as physically possible, while remaining in the classroom. His antenna kept twitching toward Ranger, unable to look away despite obvious terror. The Corvaxian with the stress fracture had applied some sort of mineral paste to the crack, and was breathing in the slow, measured way of someone trying very hard not to panic further. Lyra activated the holographic display, bringing up a 3-dimensional map of a local star system. Navigation requires understanding 3-dimensional space on a 4-dimensional timeline. You must account for gravitational wells, orbital mechanics, and… Ranger suddenly leaped from Cassidy's lap onto her desk with a grace that seemed to defy several laws of physics. He landed silently, tail swishing, and stared directly at the holographic display. Then he tried to catch one of the rotating planets. His paw swiped through the hologram repeatedly, his head tilting in confusion when he encountered nothing solid. The entire class watched in horrified fascination as this apex predator attempted to hunt a projection of a gas giant. "Ranger, no," Cassidy said, though she was clearly trying not to laugh. "That is not real. Come back here." Ranger ignored her completely, now crouched low with his hindquarters wiggling, preparing to pounce on a moon. "Your predator is broken," one of the Zephyrians observed, his fear apparently overcome by scientific curiosity. Should predators not be able to distinguish between solid objects and light projections? "He is not broken, he is just a cat," Cassidy explained, getting up to retrieve Ranger. Cats have prey drive, but not a lot of critical thinking about what constitutes prey. If it moves, it is potentially huntable. Ranger once spent 45 minutes trying to catch a reflection on the wall. She scooped him up, and he went limp in her arms like he had no bones whatsoever, draping across her shoulder in a boneless furry puddle. The Thalaxian student's bioluminescence flickered with confusion. How does it go from threatening to liquid? "Cats do not follow standard rules of biology," the male human had said before leaving. He was not wrong. Lyra deactivated the hologram before it could cause further predatory confusion and switched to a two-dimensional display on the wall screen instead. "As I was saying, coordinate systems. Essential for not dying in space. The three primary systems we use are—" Ranger started purring again, a sound that vibrated through the classroom like a small engine. Several students flinched. One relaxed. The Zephyrian pulled out a recording device. "Is this normal?" Lyra asked Cassidy, gesturing vaguely at everything. "Does your predator always behave like this?" "Oh yes," Cassidy said brightly, settling back into her seat with Ranger now sprawled across her desk like a very fluffy, very dangerous paperweight. "He is actually being really well behaved today. Sometimes he knocks things off tables just to watch them fall. Helps him understand gravity." Lyra's scales cycled through several colors that had no official names, possibly inventing new shades of exasperation. "Wonderful," she said weakly. "How absolutely wonderful. Now if there are no further interruptions from predators or humans, let us discuss how elliptical orbits work, and why you should care." Ranger yawned, showing all his teeth again, then immediately fell asleep with one paw over his face. The new normal, Lyra realized with growing horror, had arrived. The classroom emptied at the end of the session with students filing out in various states of emotional recovery. Kixon gave Ranger a wide berth, though his antenna twitching had decreased from panicked to merely nervous. The Zephyrian lingered to ask Cassidy 17 questions about cat biology, social structure, and whether Ranger would be amenable to voluntary participation in a research study about cross-species habituation. Ranger, for his part, had slept through the entire lecture and was now stretching with aggressive enthusiasm, his claws digging tiny marks into Cassidy's desk. Lyra slumped into her chair once the room had cleared, her scales the exhausted shade of gray-blue. 12 cycles of teaching, and nothing had prepared her for this. Professor Thorne shuffled in moments later, the elderly Valkyrian who had been teaching at the academy for 40 cycles and had presumably seen everything. His scales bore the distinguished silver patterns of advanced age and extensive patience. "Heard you got your first human with a companion animal," he said, settling into a student chair that creaked under his weight. "How did you survive?" "Barely," Lyra admitted. "Thorne, they have treaties, protecting their right to bring predators to class. Predators, to academic institutions." Thorne's laugh sounded like rocks tumbling down a hill. "Oh Lyra, sweet naive Lyra. You think a cat is bad? Wait until you get a human with a dog. Or worse, a human who has befriended the local wildlife and shows up with something they found that they have decided is now their responsibility. It gets worse? So much worse. 3 cycles ago, a human student in the xenobiology program adopted a Thoraxian sand borer. Do you know what those are?" Lyra's scales went pale. "Those are Class 4 hazardous fauna. They can tunnel through reinforced hull plating." "Yes. This one was a juvenile. The human named it Nibbles. It followed her everywhere. She taught it tricks." Thorne shook his head, his scales rippling with something between admiration and despair. "The human mind sees danger and decides it is an opportunity for friendship. It is their defining characteristic and also their most alarming trait. Lyra's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as she processed this information. Cassidy mentioned that Ranger is normal for humans. What do they consider abnormal? That is the thing, Thorn said, leaning forward conspiratorially. Ranger is what they classify as a small domestic predator. Earth also has large predators. Bears, big cats like tigers and lions, wolves, sharks, crocodiles. Humans have, at various points in their history, attempted to befriend all of them. Some succeeded. That is not possible. That defies basic survival instinct. Humans, Thorn said with the patience of someone explaining a fundamental universal constant, do not have normal survival instincts. Their survival instinct is to make friends with the dangerous thing, and then team up with it to fight other dangerous things. It is why their integration into galactic society has been so smooth and so absolutely terrifying. Lyra thought about Cassidy's snarl, about the cold promise in her eyes when she thought her companion was threatened. She thought about Ranger's retractable claws and hunting reflexes wrapped in a package of fluff and purrs. She thought about humans looking at that combination and seeing not danger, but family. They are going to take over the galaxy, are they not? Lyra said quietly. Oh, absolutely, Thorn agreed cheerfully. But they will do it by making everyone like them, and by refusing to follow any reasonable rules about what constitutes appropriate friendship. They will show up with their emotional support predators and their aggressive pack-bonding instincts, and their complete disregard for sensible fear responses, and somehow we will all just accept it, because arguing with a human is exhausting, and they are weirdly good at making you feel bad for being reasonable. Lyra's communication device chimed, a message from Student Services. 3 more human students with registered companion animals would be joining her afternoon navigation seminar. 2 cats and something called a ferret, which her preliminary search described as a domesticated mustelid with high energy and a tendency toward larceny. They domesticated a thief? Lyra read aloud, her voice climbing several octaves. Enthusiastically, Thorn confirmed. Humans find mischief endearing. It is part of their whole situation. Through her window, Lyra could see Cassidy crossing the campus quad with Ranger perched on her shoulder like some sort of furry, deadly parrot. The girl was laughing at something on her data tablet. The cat was surveying the quad with those forward-facing predator eyes, his tail wrapped around her neck for balance. Other students gave them space, but Lyra noticed something interesting. They were not running away anymore. A few were even watching, with what might have been curiosity rather than pure terror. Adaptation. It was already happening. How long until they have us all convinced that keeping predators as companions is normal? Lyra asked. Thorn stood, his scales shifting to an amused shade of green. For you, based on how you are watching that human and her cat right now with something other than pure horror, I give it 3 weeks, maybe 4 if you are particularly stubborn. He was right. Lyra realized with dawning horror. She had just spent 5 seconds thinking that Ranger looked rather majestic perched up there, and that his orange fur caught the sunlight in an aesthetically pleasing way. The humans were winning. They had invaded the galaxy not with weapons or threats, but with their insane pack-bonding instincts, and their absolute conviction that anything could be friend-shaped if you just tried hard enough. They had brought their predators with them, wrapped them in legal protections and emotional justifications, and now everyone else just had to accept that this was normal. And the truly terrifying part, it was working. Lyra pulled up her afternoon class roster, and began preparing for the arrival of 2 more cats and a larcenous mustelid. Somewhere in the galaxy, she was certain, a human was befriending something even more improbable, teaching it tricks, and filling out the paperwork to bring it to class. The galaxy had survived wars, plagues, and cosmic catastrophes, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared them for humans and their emotional support predators. Class dismissed.